The sun was setting over the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air smelled fresh, with a hint of wild grass and earth. It was one of those evenings that made you feel alive, like everything was right in the world. 4. The family living on Willow Creek Ranch. This kind of evening wasn't rare, it was their everyday life. This ranch wasn't just a piece of land, it was home. Generations had lived here, tending to the animals, growing crops, and building memories. The father, a man with calloused hands and a warm smile, had spent most of his life working outdoors. His wife, equally hard-working, balanced running the household with helping out on the farm. And then there was their teenage daughter, a spirited girl who loved nothing more than riding her horse across the open fields or sitting by the barn, sketching pictures of the wildlife around her. Life at the ranch was simple but fulfilling. Every morning started early, with roosters crowing and the smell of breakfast wafting through the house. The days were filled with chores, feeding the cattle, fixing fences, grooming horses, but no one complained. There was something magical about being so connected to nature, about watching the seasons change and knowing your own two hands helped keep things going. But as peaceful as life seemed on the ranch, trouble always has a way of finding its way into even the quietest corners. Just beyond the fence line, in the neighboring subdivision called Oakwood Heights, a storm had been brewing for years. This wasn't your typical suburban neighborhood. No, Oakwood Heights was ruled by an iron fist disguised as a homeowners association, HOA. And at the center of it all was a woman everyone called Karen. Now Karen wasn't exactly popular in the area. She wasn't the friendly neighbor who baked cookies or offered to water your plants while you were away. Instead, she was the type of person who policed every little thing. How tall your grass grew, what color your front door was, whether your mailbox leaned slightly to the left. To her, rules weren't suggestions. They were commandments carved in stone. And if you dared to break them, well, let's just say Karen didn't hesitate to remind you of the consequences. For years, Karen focused her attention on the residents of Oakwood Heights. But lately, her gaze had shifted toward the ranch next door. She'd noticed the teenage girl riding her horse along a trail near the property line, the same trail that wound between towering oak trees and overlooked rolling pastures. To Karen, this wasn't some idyllic scene straight out of a storybook. Oh no, to her, it was a violation, a trespass, an affront to the sanctity of her precious HOA-controlled common areas. At first, Karen tried handling things quietly. She sent letters, sternly worded notes demanding that the family stop using herd trails. Of course, the ranchers didn't pay much attention. They knew the trail ran entirely within their own property, thanks to old deeds and surveys that proved it. Besides, they'd been using that path long before Karen or her HOA ever existed. So they ignored her threats and went about their business, figuring she'd eventually give up. But Karen didn't give up. If anything, she doubled down. Her frustration grew each time she saw the girl on horseback, galloping freely without a care in the world. To Karen, it wasn't just about the trail anymore. It was about control, about proving that she was in charge, that her power extended far beyond the manicured lawns of Oakwood Heights. One day, unable or unwilling to let it go, Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. What happened next would change everything, not just for the ranchers, but for the entire community. Little did anyone know, karma was lurking just around the corner, ready to deliver a lesson Karen would never forget. As the tension built, the stage was set for a showdown. On one side stood a family simply trying to live their lives, doing what they'd done for generations. On the other side stood a woman consumed by her need to dominate, blind to the ripple effects of her actions. Neither side could have predicted how quickly things would spiral, or how justice would arrive in the most unexpected way possible. The tension between the ranch family and Karen had been simmering for weeks, but no one expected it to boil over quite so dramatically. One Friday afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, the calm of the ranch was shattered by the sound of tires crunching on gravel. A car pulled into the driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust. Out stepped Karen, her face set in a scowl, flanked by two police officers. At first glance, it seemed surreal. Here was this woman, dressed in clothes that screamed suburban enforcer, marching onto private property like she owned the place. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and her lips were pressed into a thin line. She looked every bit the part of someone who had come to deliver an ultimatum, and she wasn't about to back down. "Good afternoon," the taller of the two officers said, tipping his hat politely. The father of the house stepped forward, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd been tinkering with the tractor when the commotion started, and now he stood there, trying to make sense of what was happening. His wife appeared behind him, her brow furrowed with concern. Their daughter lingered near the stable, clutching the reins of her horse, unsure whether to stay or retreat inside. Karen wasted no time getting to the point. "This is regarding repeated violations of HOA regulations," she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Your daughter has been using trails that fall under our jurisdiction without permission. This constitutes trespassing." The accusation hung in the air like a storm cloud. The father blinked, momentarily taken aback. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "Ma'am, I think you're mistaken," he said calmly. "That trail runs entirely within our property. We've got deeds and surveys proving it. My family's used that path for decades." Karen's nostrils flared at the challenge. "Deeds? Surveys?" She scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Those documents are outdated. The HOA has updated zoning maps, and those trails clearly belong to us. You're breaking the law." The words felt absurd, even to the officers standing beside her. One of them exchanged a glance with the other, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. They weren't here because they believed Karen's claims. They were here because she'd insisted on involving them. Still, protocol demanded they investigate, so they asked to see the paperwork. While the adults talked, the teenage girl stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She'd done nothing wrong, just ridden her horse along a trail she'd always known as hers. But now, thanks to Karen, she found herself at the center of a bizarre confrontation. Tears welled up in her eyes, not out of fear, but out of frustration. Why couldn't people just leave them alone? Why did someone have to turn something so simple into such a big deal? Back at the driveway, the father retrieved the documents from the house and handed them over. The officers flipped through the pages, nodding as they confirmed the boundaries. Everything checked out. The trail was indeed part of the ranch's property, yet Karen refused to accept it. Her face turned red, and she began speaking louder, more forcefully. "These papers mean nothing," she snapped. "You're ruining the neighborhood aesthetic. If you don't stop immediately, I'll have no choice but to press charges." Her dramatic declaration might have worked on the timid homeowners of Oakwood Heights, but it didn't faze the ranch family. The father sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, ma'am," he said, his tone firm but respectful, "we're not doing anything illegal. Our daughter rides her horse on our own land. That's it. Maybe instead of harassing us, you should focus on making your community a better place." Karen bristled at the suggestion. How dare he criticize her? She opened her mouth to fire back. Another retort, but before she could speak, something strange happened. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her tirade. At first, she ignored it, too caught up in her rage to care. But then it buzzed again and again. Each vibration seemed to grow louder, more insistent, until she couldn't ignore it any longer. With a huff, Karen pulled out her phone and glanced at the screen. Her expression shifted instantly from anger to confusion, then to outright panic. Whatever she was reading, it wasn't good. Her fingers flew across the screen as she scrolled. Through messages and emails, her lips moving silently as she processed the information. The officers noticed her sudden change in demeanor. "Everything okay, ma'am?" one of them asked cautiously. Karen didn't answer. Instead, she shoved her phone back into her pocket, her face pale. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed off, climbing into her car and speeding away in a cloud of dust. The entire scene unfolded so quickly that no one had time to react. One moment she was yelling about trespassing and pressing charges. The next, she was gone, leaving behind only silence and unanswered questions. The officers exchanged another look, this one tinged with amusement. "Well," the taller one said, scratching the back of his neck, "I guess we're done here. Have a good evening, folks." As the patrol car drove off, the family stood there, stunned. What had just happened? Had Karen finally realized she was wrong? Or was there something else going on, something bigger than anyone could have anticipated? Whatever it was, one thing was clear: the battle wasn't over yet. Something monumental had occurred, something that would ripple through the community and change everything. For now, though, the ranch family could breathe a sigh of relief. They'd stood their ground, and karma, or maybe just plain old justice, had stepped in to handle the rest. The ranch family stood there for a moment, watching Karen's car disappear down the dusty road. The air was thick with confusion and disbelief. What had just happened? One minute, she was yelling about trespassing and threatening to call the cops, and the next, she was gone, vanishing like smoke in the wind. It didn't make sense. The father scratched his head, still holding the stack of property deeds in one hand. His wife leaned against him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She let out a long sigh, shaking her head. "What on earth is going on?" she muttered under her breath. Their teenage daughter walked up slowly, still clutching the reins of her horse. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mix of relief and bewilderment. "Do you think she finally realized we're right?" the girl asked softly, breaking the silence. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the emotions bubbling beneath. The surface her father shrugged, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe something else spooked her. Either way, I'm glad it's over for now, at least." But as much as they wanted to believe the drama was behind them, deep down, they knew better. Karen wasn't the type to back down without a fight. Something must have scared her off, and whatever it was, it had to be big. Meanwhile, across the fence line in Oakwood Heights, chaos was erupting. Word spread quickly among the residents that Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, had been served some kind of legal notice. No one knew exactly what it said, but rumors flew faster than wildfire on a dry summer day. Some claimed she'd been caught embezzling funds from the HOA treasury. Others whispered about forged signatures on official documents or illegal fines imposed on unsuspecting homeowners. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: Karen's reign of terror was crumbling, and karma was delivering its verdict with brutal efficiency. By the time evening rolled around, a group of neighbors gathered in the community park, swapping stories and piecing together the puzzle. They sat on picnic benches, sipping coffee and sharing knowing glances. For years they'd lived under Karen's thumb, too afraid to speak up. But now, with her power stripped away, they felt emboldened. One man, who'd been fined repeatedly for having flower pots that didn't match the HOA-approved color palette, leaned forward with a grin. "You know, I always thought someone should take her down," he said, chuckling. "I just never imagined it would happen this fast." A woman sitting beside him nodded, her face lighting up with excitement. "Me neither," she admitted. "But honestly, I'm not surprised. Someone like her couldn't keep running things the way she did without making enemies. Turns out she made a lot of them. As the conversation continued, more details emerged. Apparently, a handful of brave residents had banded together months ago, quietly gathering evidence of Karen's misconduct. They'd hired lawyers, filed complaints, and even uncovered financial records showing how she'd misused HOA money for personal gain. All of it came to a head earlier that day when their efforts paid off in record time. When Karen received the email notifying her of the HOS dissolution, she realized her empire was collapsing around her. In just 3 short minutes, everything she'd worked so hard to control was ripped away. The same authority figures she'd summoned to intimidate the ranch family were now looking at her with suspicion. And worst of all, she faced potential criminal charges for her actions. Back at the ranch, the family remained oblivious to the full extent of what had transpired. They went about their evening routines, trying to shake off the strange encounter with Karen. Dinner was unusually quiet, each person lost in their own thoughts. The daughter picked at her food, replaying the scene in her mind. "Do you think she'll come back?" she asked finally, breaking the silence. Her mother reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand over hers. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said gently. "But if she does, we'll handle it. Together." Her words carried weight, grounding everyone in the moment. Despite the uncertainty, they found comfort in knowing they'd done nothing wrong. Their land was theirs, their lives were theirs, and no amount of bullying could change that. Later that night, as the stars began to twinkle in the vast sky above Willow Creek Ranch, the father stepped outside for one last walk around the property. He paused near the fence line, staring out at the dark outline of Oakwood Heights in the distance. There was a strange sense of peace in the air, a feeling that justice, in its own unpredictable way, had been served. Little did they know, the fallout from Karen's downfall would ripple far beyond their little corner of the world. Over the coming days, the entire community would begin to heal and rebuild from the scars left behind by her toxic leadership. For now, though, the ranch family could rest easy, knowing they'd stood their ground when it mattered most. And somewhere, miles away, Karen sat alone in her living room, staring blankly at the walls, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly. Karma, it seemed, wasn't just blind, it was merciless. The days following Karen's dramatic exit from the ranch were a whirlwind of change, not just for the family, but for the entire community. Word of what had happened spread like wildfire, fueled by whispers and speculation. People who had once kept their heads down to avoid Karen's wrath suddenly found themselves standing taller, speaking louder, and reclaiming their sense of freedom. For the ranch family, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could get after such an intense showdown. The father went back to fixing fences and tending to the animals, while the mother busied herself with household chores and baking her famous apple pies. Their teenage daughter, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was happening beyond their fence line. She'd catch snippets of conversation whenever she rode her horse, near Oakwood Heights neighbors chatting animatedly about the end of Karen's reign or starting fresh. It was clear that the neighborhood was undergoing a transformation, one that felt long overdue. One afternoon, as the girl watered the horses in the stable, she noticed someone approaching the fence. It was a woman from Oakwood Heights, someone she vaguely recognized but had never spoken to before. The woman waved hesitantly, then called out, "Hey there, do you mind if I come over for a minute?" Curious, the girl nodded and walked over to meet her. Up close, the woman seemed nervous, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said finally, her voice soft but sincere. "You and your family didn't back down when Karen came after you. That took guts." The compliment caught the girl off guard. She hadn't thought of herself as brave, just determined to protect her home and her way of life. "We weren't trying to cause trouble," she replied honestly. "We just didn't think we were doing anything wrong." The woman smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "That's exactly why so many of us are grateful. You stood up to her when no one else would. It gave us hope that maybe we could take our neighborhood back too." As they talked, the girl learned more about the secret rebellion brewing in Oakwood Heights. A small group of residents had been quietly gathering evidence against Karen for months, documenting every unfair fine, every manipulated rule, every instance of bullying. When the final blow came, the legal notice dissolving, the HOA, it wasn't just luck or coincidence. It was the result of hard work, courage, and a shared desire for justice. Over the next few weeks, the relationship between the ranch family and their neighbors began to shift. People who had once avoided eye contact now stopped by to introduce themselves. Some brought homemade dishes or baskets of fruit as gestures of goodwill. Others invited them to community meetings, eager to hear their thoughts on how to move forward without falling back into old patterns of control and fear. At first, the ranch family was hesitant to get involved. They'd always kept to themselves, preferring the solitude of country living to the politics of suburban drama. But as more invitations arrived and as their daughter became friends with some of the kids from Oakwood Heights, they realized they couldn't stay on the sidelines forever. This was their community too, whether they liked it or not. One evening, the whole family attended a meeting at the local community center. The room buzzed with energy, filled with faces both familiar and new. Residents sat in folding chairs arranged in a circle, passing around sheets of paper detailing plans for the future. Gone were the rigid rules and suffocating restrictions imposed by Karen's HOA. In their place were ideas focused on cooperation, creativity, and connection. A man stood up to speak, his voice steady but warm. "We've got a chance to start over," he said, looking around the room. "To build something better not just for ourselves, but for our kids and grandkids. Let's make sure this time everyone has a voice." The crowd erupted into applause, and even the ranch family clapped along, feeling a spark of optimism they hadn't felt in years. For the first time, they saw the potential for harmony between their quiet, rural lifestyle and the bustling suburb next door. Maybe coexistence wasn't just possible, it could be beautiful. Karen, meanwhile, had all but vanished from public view. Rumors swirled about where she'd gone and what she was doing. Some said she'd packed up and moved to another state to escape the fallout. Others claimed she was holed up in her house, too ashamed to show her face. Whatever the truth, no one missed her presence or her iron grip on the neighborhood. Without Karen's constant interference, Oakwood Heights began to breathe again. Lawns grew a little longer, mailboxes leaned a little crooked, and front doors appeared in colors that weren't strictly beige or white. Children played freely in the streets, and laughter echoed through the air. Even the trails near the ranch reopened, becoming shared spaces where families from both sides of the fence could walk, bike, or ride horses together. Inspired by the changes, the ranch family decided to host a small gathering at their home, a sort of open house to celebrate the newfound unity. They invited everyone, neighbors from Oakwood Heights, friends from nearby farms, and even strangers passing through town. The turnout was overwhelming, with people spilling onto the porch and into the yard. There was music, food, and plenty of stories shared under the starlit sky. As the night wore on, the teenage girl found herself sitting by the fire pit with a group of kids her age. They laughed and joked, swapping tales of school, hobbies, and dreams for the future. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged not just to her family or her ranch, but to something bigger, something hopeful. Her parents watched from a distance, their arms wrapped around each other. "Do you think this is real?" her mother asked softly, gesturing to the lively scene around them. "Or will things go back to how they were?" Her father shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "Only time will tell," he admitted. "But if nothing else, we showed them that sticking together can make a difference. And that's worth holding on to." Months had passed since the showdown with Karen, and life in Willow Creek Ranch and Oakwood Heights had settled into a rhythm that felt almost too good to be true. The ranch family woke up every morning to the familiar sounds of roosters crowing, wind rustling through the trees, and the distant neighs of horses eager for their morning oats. But now there was something new in the air, a sense of peace, not just within their own property lines, but extending far beyond them, the once divided. Community had transformed into something no one could have imagined during Karen's reign of terror. People from both sides of the fence were talking, laughing, and working together. It wasn't perfect. There were still disagreements here and there, but the spirit of cooperation had replaced fear and resentment. For the first time in years, Oakwood Heights felt like a real neighborhood, not just a collection of houses ruled by strict rules and harsh penalties. One crisp autumn morning, the ranch family decided it was time to celebrate. They'd been quietly planning an event for weeks, the first annual Harvest Festival. It wasn't just for themselves or their immediate neighbors, it was for everyone. Families from Oakwood Heights, farmers from nearby lands, and even folks passing through town were invited. The goal was simple: bring people together, share stories, and enjoy each other's company without worrying about whose lawn was greener or whose mailbox leaned slightly to the left. Preparations began early. The father spent hours stringing up strings of lights between the towering oak trees near the barn, while the mother baked pies and cakes until the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and sugar. Their teenage daughter took charge of organizing games. For the kids' hay rides, pumpkin carving contests, and sack races. Even the animals got involved. Goats wandered freely around the yard, much to the delight of visiting children who giggled as they tried to pet the stubborn creatures. By late afternoon, the ranch was buzzing with activity. Cars lined the driveway, and the fields were alive with laughter and music. A local band played cheerful tunes on a makeshift stage, while families gathered around picnic tables laden with food. Plates piled high with roasted corn, fried chicken, and homemade jams made their way back and forth, shared generously among strangers. Friends. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting everything in golden hues, the teenage girl climbed onto a bale of hay to address the crowd. Her cheeks flushed pink from excitement. She raised her hands to quiet the chatter. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice steady despite the sea of faces looking up at her. "This festival is about celebrating how far we've come, not just as neighbors, but as a community." Her words struck a chord. People nodded, some clapping softly, others wiping away tears. She went on to talk about the struggles they'd faced, the fear, the division, the years of living under someone else's thumb. "But look at us now," she said, gesturing to the lively scene around her. "We didn't let anger win. We chose to work together, to listen to each other, and to build something better. That's what this day is all about." When she finished speaking, the applause was thunderous. Someone handed her a cup of apple cider, and she hopped down from the hay bale, grinning ear to ear. As she mingled with the crowd, she noticed how different things felt compared to just a year ago. Back then, she'd rarely spoken to anyone outside her family, afraid of judgment or conflict. Now she moved easily from group to group, chatting with parents, playing tag with kids, and even helping an elderly neighbor find his misplaced cane. Nearby, her parents watched proudly. The father stood with his arms crossed, leaning against a fence post, while the mother chatted animatedly with a woman from Oakwood Heights. They'd bonded over their shared love of gardening, swapping tips on growing tomatoes and keeping pests away. Neither of them could believe how much had changed in such a short time. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and the fire pits scattered around the property crackled to life. Groups of people huddled close, sharing blankets and s'mores. Supplies. Conversations flowed effortlessly, ranging from funny childhood memories to hopes for the future. One man, a former HOA member who'd once enforced Karen's strict rules, admitted sheepishly that he regretted ever siding with her. "I should have spoken up sooner," he said, shaking his head. "If I had, maybe we wouldn't have wasted so many years being miserable." His honesty earned nods of agreement from those around him. Another neighbor chimed in, "It's not about blame anymore. What matters is that we're moving forward together." Karen's absence loomed, large over the festivities, though no one mentioned her name. Some wondered if she'd ever return, while others hoped she wouldn't. Either way, her shadow no longer darkened their lives. Instead, her downfall served as a reminder of the power of unity and standing up for what's right. Karma had delivered its verdict swiftly and decisively, leaving behind a lesson none of them would soon forget. As the evening wore on, the ranch family gathered on a hill overlooking the celebration. The father put an arm around his wife, pulling her close as they watched the flickering lights below. Their daughter joined them, plopping down on the grass with a contented sigh. "You know," she said after a moment, "this is the happiest I've ever seen everyone." Her mother smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Me too," she replied softly. "And it's because we didn't give up. We fought for what mattered, not just for ourselves, but for everyone." The father nodded, gazing out at the glowing horizon. "Sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy," he said. "But when you stick together, anything's possible." They sat there in silence for a while, letting the moment sink in. The festival below was more than just a party. It was proof that healing was possible, that bridges could be built where walls once stood. It was a testament to the strength of ordinary people coming together to create something extraordinary. When the last guests finally said their goodbyes and drove off into the night, the ranch family lingered outside a little longer. The stars sparkled above, and the cool breeze carried the faint scent of wood smoke. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing they'd played a part in rewriting their community's story, not with anger or revenge, but with patience, perseverance, and heart. And as they turned off the porch light and headed inside, ready to rest after a long day, they knew one thing for certain. Their fight hadn't just changed their lives. It had changed the lives of everyone around them, and that was worth every ounce of effort.